There are files that change you, not because of what they contain, but because of what they confirm. You always suspected the world had a back room, a place where power operated without rules, where names you'd recognize from headlines made deals you'd never read about in any newspaper. Then, one morning, your supervisor drops a classified folder on your desk, looks you dead in the eye, and says, "You have 11 days. Don't talk to anyone, don't take notes home, and whatever you feel when you're done, keep it to yourself." Day 1. The assignment. The folder arrives at 7:43 a.m. No fanfare, no briefing room full of people in suits, just a manila envelope, a clearance stamp, and a sticky note that says, "Prioritize the network, not the individual." Your first thought, this is bigger than one person. Day 1 is logistics. You're not reading explosive revelations yet. You're reading structure. Flight manifests, visitor logs, incorporation records for shell companies registered in places that don't ask questions. But here's what stops you on page 4. The same names appear across completely unconnected documents. A tech investor in one file, a government official in another, a famous academic in a third. They don't know each other officially, but they've all been to the same island in the same 2-week window, every year for a decade. You write one word in your notepad: pattern. Day 2. The island. Today's file is geography, the property, aerial photographs, blueprints filed with local authorities that don't match what satellite imagery actually shows. Buildings that appear in photos don't appear on permits. A structure near the northern cliff, no utility hookups, no listed purpose. The island was purchased legally, staffed legally, visited legally. And yet, every layer you pull back reveals another layer designed to not be pulled back. The staff records are the strangest part. Workers flown in from abroad on temporary visas. Some stayed for years, some left suddenly with no forwarding address. Their names appear in the visitor logs, but only in sections that were supposed to have been redacted. Someone, somewhere, made a mistake, and that mistake is sitting in your file on day 2. You circle it in red. It's the first thread. Day 3. The network. By day 3, you understand why your supervisor said network first, because the man himself, the subject of the file, was never operating alone. There were coordinators, schedulers, legal buffers, people whose entire job seemed to be the smooth management of access. Access to events, access to people, access to influence. You find a document, a socialite's calendar cross-referenced with travel records and public event appearances. The overlap is surgical. Certain guests would appear at a charity gala on a Friday. By Saturday, they were on a private plane. By Monday, they were back at official functions, smiling for cameras. Like nothing happened, like the weekend existed in a different universe. You start a chart, connecting names to dates to locations. By the time you finish, the chart covers your entire desk. You photograph it. Then you remember, no notes leave the building. You stare at it for a long time before you erase it. Day 4. The leverage. This is the day the file stops feeling like paperwork and starts feeling like a weapon. There's a section, heavily redacted in the public version, less redacted in yours, about documentation. Not evidence collected by law enforcement, documentation collected by the subject. Photographs, recordings, written correspondences kept in safe deposit boxes across 4 countries. You read the inventory list. You don't need to see the contents to understand what it means. When powerful people visit a place, and that place quietly keeps a record of their visit, that record isn't insurance. The word your predecessor wrote in the margin of this page was not blackmail, too blunt, too provable. They wrote architecture of compliance, meaning you don't need to threaten someone directly, you just need them to know you have the file. After that, They comply all on their own. Day 4 is when you stop being surprised and start being very, very careful.
Day 5. The protections. How does something this large stay hidden this long? Day 5 answers that. Not with dramatic revelations, but with a quiet procedural horror. Legal agreements with non-disclosure clauses so aggressive they border on unconstitutional, filed in jurisdictions chosen specifically because their courts move slowly. Civil complaints that were settled before discovery could begin. Settlements funded through foundations, not personal accounts. Foundations that also donated to universities, hospitals, and political campaigns. You find a letter from a law firm, a very famous law firm, advising on how to structure an agreement so that even if the agreement were ever challenged, the challenger would spend a decade in court before seeing a single document. The letter is dated 2007. It worked until 2019, 12 years. You think about all the people who tried to speak before 2019, about what happened to their cases, about who made the calls. Day 6. The victims. Day 6 is the hardest day. Not because the file is more graphic. It isn't. You're an analyst. The file is careful and clinical. It's hard because the victims' testimonies are meticulous. Dates, locations, specific rooms, specific routines, details that no one invents, because invented stories don't have that quality of ordinary mundane texture that real memory carries. What stays with you isn't the dramatic moments in their accounts, it's the small things. The way one account describes the color of a towel, the way another describes the sound of a door latch, the way they were made to feel that no one would believe them, and that even if someone did, nothing would ever be done. They were right for a long time. You read every testimony, every single one, because someone has to. Day 7. The institutions. By day 7, you've stopped thinking about one man and started thinking about ecosystems. Universities that accepted massive donations from a man already under federal investigation. Research institutes that published his name as a benefactor long after the first accusations were public. Regulatory bodies that received complaints and opened inquiries that quietly went nowhere. You find a memo, internal, never meant to be released, from a government agency that reviewed an earlier complaint and concluded there was insufficient grounds for escalation. The memo is 2 paragraphs long. 2 paragraphs. For a complaint that referenced dozens of potential victims across multiple states and countries. You read those 2 paragraphs 7 times. You try to understand how someone writes 2 paragraphs and walks away feeling like they did their job. Day 8. The inventory of what's missing. Every major case has gaps. That's normal. But these gaps have a shape. Flight records for specific date ranges, gone. Specific pages of visitor logs, removed. Security footage from the island property, described in an inventory as existing, then described in a later inventory as unable to be located. You find a court deposition where a lawyer asks a witness about a specific video recording. The witness confirms it existed. The lawyer confirms it was listed in discovery materials. Then the next page of the deposition is blank, followed by a notation, proceedings paused. The recording is never mentioned again in any subsequent filing. You sit with that for a while. Evidence doesn't just disappear. Evidence gets helped to disappear. And helping evidence disappear requires someone with access. You add a new section to your mental file. Who had access? Day 9. The unanswered questions. 9 days in, you are no longer the person who sat down at this desk. You have read things that cannot be unread. You have seen connections that cannot be unseen. And the most honest entry in your mental log for day 9 is a list of questions that the file does not answer. Who else knew and when? Why did the 2008 plea deal include conditions that federal prosecutors later admitted were irregular? How many of the people in the network still hold positions of institutional power today? What's in the sealed portions of the civil case, the portions a federal judge has still not released? Why did it take decades, multiple survivors coming forward independently, and a journalist refusing to drop the story for a prosecution to finally happen? The file doesn't answer these. No file does. But the questions are real, and they belong to all of us, not just analysts in secured rooms. Day 10. The system. Day 10 isn't about one predator. It's about a system that was load-bearing. Because here's what strikes you, and what you'll think about long after you've closed the last page. Nothing in this file required magic. Nothing required vast conspiracies with hundreds of members all keeping perfect secrets. It just required incentives to look away. A prosecutor who wanted a career in politics, a fixer who wanted to remain valuable to powerful clients, a journalist whose network executives killed the story, an academic who needed the grant money, an official who wanted the problem to go away quietly. No one had to make a single evil phone call. They just had to do what was convenient, what was professionally comfortable, what kept doors open and conversations pleasant. And in the space created by all that comfortable looking away, the harm continued for decades. That's what a system looks like, not a monster in a lair. 1,000 small choices that pointed in the same direction. Day 11. What you do with this. On the last day, you don't receive a new file. You receive a form. It asks you to certify that you've reviewed the materials, that your work product will remain classified at the appropriate level, that you understand your obligations under the non-disclosure protocols. You sign it, because that's the job. But before you close the folder for the last time, you sit quietly for a few minutes, and you think about the bar employee in one of the witness accounts, an older woman who'd worked on the property for years. When someone finally asked if she was okay, she said everything was fine. And then she said, "You're not the first." Meaning others came before you. Others saw. Others filed their forms. Others signed their non-disclosures. And the island kept running. The files don't change the world on their own. The files have to go somewhere. They have to become articles and testimonies and prosecutions and uncomfortable conversations that people refuse to let die. You were an analyst. Your job was to review. But the people watching this video, you're not bound by a non-disclosure form. The survivors spoke. The journalists investigated. The court cases are public record. The only thing left is whether the rest of us decide this matters enough to keep asking the questions that the powerful would rather we forgot.